So, welcome everyone to our quarterly chapter vision webinar. Just some housekeeping pieces. Everyone is muted upon entry, and we will be recording this session so that if you miss any of it, then you will be able to revisit it later. So just for a quick welcome, my name is Bailey Bostelman, and I'm the Regional Field Director for the East. And we're so excited for you to be here with us today. And we appreciate you sharing your Saturday with us. I would like to briefly just review some logistical details for the call. Currently, all participant lines are muted. Today's call is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants after the meeting concludes. You'll also be able to find the recording on the Foundation Fighting Blindness website within the coming days. If you're using a screen reader, please be aware that the controls are at the bottom of the Zoom interface. This control bar may collapse when not in use, so make sure to jiggle your mouse before clicking anything. If you prefer to prevent the controls from auto hiding, go to your settings within the Zoom platform, select accessibility, and then select always show meeting controls. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please be sure to send them in using the Q&A or chat function. We will do our best to answer as many questions live during the presentation. As many of you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and as part of that, the Foundation Fighting Blindness is working to shine a light on how low vision impacts mental health. We're committed to bridging this gap by creating a dedicated mental health resource site that offers tools, resources, and connections to help individuals and families manage the unique complexities associated with vision changes. From expert guidance and accessible therapy options to community stories and practical tools, our goal is to empower those facing these experiences with knowledge, support, and a sense of community. You can find these resources on our website at fightingblindness.org/mental-health. I'll also drop the link in the chat so that you can check out these great resources. Now, without further ado, I'm excited to welcome our first speaker of the day, Rebecca Alexander, who is an award-winning author, psychotherapist, speaker, and disability advocate. She specializes in anxiety, depression, trauma, and grief, and the psychological impact of a progressive disability. Her personal experience with Usher syndrome deeply informs her compassionate and evidence-based approach, empowering clients to build resilience and connection. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. So Bailey, thank you for the introduction. And I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for taking the time to be here today. I know that some people are having trouble logging on, so I hope that you're all able to hear me okay and get the information from all of us today. But again, it's going to be recorded. So as Bailey mentioned, I'm Rebecca Alexander. I've been involved with the Foundation Fighting Blindness since I was about 12 years old, and I just want to orient you a little bit to my relationship to FFB. I was diagnosed with RP when I was 12 and later diagnosed with Usher syndrome. My first conference was when I was 15 years old. I'm now 46, so that was some time ago. And one of the highlights or memories that I have that really sort of made me feel this sense of not being so alone with my diagnosis were the groups that they had at the conference for teens, for young adults and teens. And that was where I met other kids and teenagers who also had RP. At the time, that's what we thought I had. And it was so meaningful for me that it made every conference I went to all about less about the research and the science. Okay, mom, dad, anybody else can go for that. And for me, it was really about being able to connect with others. And I have found throughout the years that that really has been sort of the hallmark for so many people, is going to these conferences and being able to really connect with others. So throughout my own process of coming to terms with a diagnosis that I'm going progressively deaf and blind. And today, I couldn't tell you exactly how much vision I have, but let's say it's somewhere 10 degrees or less. And I have donut vision, so I have this very outermost periphery, but really not so much anymore, and just my very central vision. And I'm cochlear implanted on both sides. Without them, I am completely deaf. Nobody sleeps better than I do in New York City, that's for certain. But having a diagnosis like this, and at the age of 12, when I was first diagnosed, my parents became very involved with FFB. And I was told in 10 years there would be treatment. And then I was told, well, in 10 years, there's going to be treatment. And then in 10 years, and in 10 years. And there is so much exciting research and science that is happening and continues to progress. And yet I am still here now at 46. And that's something that has been promised to me since I was 12. And the reason why I mention this is I just wondered to myself, is it possible that we don't have to be just searching for a cure, for treatments, and if we don't find it, that our lives are going to be unfulfilling, or that we aren't going to be able to have meaningful lives, or what do we do in the meantime? And the other thing that I found was that over time, as I continued to experience this loss, it's not just a physical experience and having to do the orientation and mobility and learning how to use a cane and figuring out all of the accessibility features and technology, but it's the actual real and lived experience of progressively losing, in my case, two of my vital senses. And I ask so many people all of the time, well, what senses do you rely on most each day? And the reality is that I think just about everyone I ask will say my vision and my hearing. Think about how many times you've looked at your phone, how much you navigate with your vision. And so I think it's so crucial for us to be able to really acknowledge how important it is for us to focus on the research. Absolutely. If someone told me that, tomorrow I could fly to the moon in the clothes that I'm wearing and they'd be able to restore my vision, I would do it in a second. But I also know that in praying for, treatment and for the research, that it also has had a major implication on my own confidence as someone who is out and about in the world, that hasn't necessarily helped me in being able to come to terms with the very real reality that, yes, I'm very hopeful and optimistic that maybe there will be treatment, but there might not be. And if there's not, I need to be prepared, and I need to be able to make the appropriate adjustments, and I need to be able to find that sense of comfort in myself, that sense of the ability to deal with all of the emotions that come with it, because it really is an experience of grief and loss. And there's, we're all familiar, I think, or many of us are familiar with the model of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross of death and dying, where you have the, 5 stages of grief. And that's the denial, the bargaining, the anger, depression, acceptance, all of that. And yet progressive disability has a little bit different of a model. And that model has a lot more to do with sort of shifting identity and being able to self-advocate and learning those skills. And so that's something that in my own practice and the people that I work with, I really try to focus on the ways in which we can deal with our current circumstances while also seeking treatment and potentially a way to stop further progression of the loss that we're experiencing. So I want to give you some tools here today, because I think that's why most people are here. And then I want to sort of weave in some of these tools with some anecdotes from my own experience. One of the things that I have found to be most common among the people that I work with in my own practice and myself is this very sort of complex, complicated relationship with loss, and this feeling of wanting to do everything I can while I still can, this sense of urgency, and then also feeling this sense of like helplessness and not wanting to be a burden and frustration of not being able to do the things that I used to be able to do on my own, and I just want to be able to do them on my own, and not wanting anybody to help me, and all of the ways in which I personally, and I know so many of the people I work with, we kind of can't get out of our own way because we're not allowing ourselves to really feel what it feels like emotionally to experience the loss. And I think that there are so many family members and there are so many loved ones who likely are on this call today who are experiencing that too. The number of people I hear who tell me, if I could take this away from my son, if I could take this away from my spouse, if I could take this away from my loved one and take it on myself, I would do that because it's so painful, it's so difficult, it's so, challenging to watch or to be a part of. And yet, the people I work with who have this condition will say, "Oh, I wouldn't want anybody else to have this. I'm so glad it's me and not them." And so it's sort of interesting to hear the difference there. And the reality is that we're all going through this together. Even though your loved one may be the one living with an inherited retinal degenerative condition, or inherited retinal disease, we're all affected. And so what I find is that oftentimes when people are early in a diagnosis, we're scrounging to find all of the resources that we can. Oftentimes I find that one of the common things people do is that they want to start a new 501(c)(3. They just want to do everything they can, and there's a sense of scarcity. There's a sense of, helplessness. There's a sense of loss. There's a sense of, and when we operate that way, it means that we're operating from a place of fear and a place of anxiety, and it becomes insidious. It starts to sort of eat away at us. So, is it possible that as we're seeking treatments, that we can also be learning to make the necessary adjustments so that we can be prepared for whatever might happen? And I want to give FFB so much credit for listening to the community and hearing that, yes, we are all looking for treatments, but also that the mental health needs are very real. And so that's part of the partnership that Elizabeth Morey will tell you about in a little bit. But so one of the common things that happens is that when you start to experience greater loss, we tend to isolate ourselves a bit more. We tend to not get involved or be involved or stay involved because our needs have changed and we haven't yet figured out A, how to ask for what we need in that new situation, or B, we haven't developed that skill, that self-advocacy skill to be able to, seek the support that we need. So for instance, when I go to, a restaurant and people invite me, to have dinner, I know that it's going to be very noisy and it's going to be very dark. I live in New York City. And so it's not something that I enjoy as much as I used to. And so when people would invite me, I'd be like, "Oh, thanks for the offer," but I would make excuses or I'd find myself just, not participating. And I found myself isolating. I found myself feeling more depressed and just kind of feeling disconnected. And so what I realized is like, okay, well, I came up with restaurants, that had better lighting, or I made sure that if we went to a restaurant that I was somewhere where I always made sure that I was against the wall so that the sound would not be able to sort of reverberate through the room, but actually would be blocked by the wall. And so I would show up and have to ask for what I needed. But it took me time to get to that place because I did not want to be a burden. I didn't want anybody to feel like they had to accommodate me because I didn't even want to have needs or to feel like I was somehow burdening other people. And yet, when we take on that stance of being so afraid to be a burden, we actually become an even sort of bigger burden because people aren't mind readers and they don't know what we need. They can sort of guess and they can try to help us. But unless we're able to really sort of recognize how we can make any situation more accessible for us, then other people are going to continue to treat us as though we don't necessarily have those needs. And even wrestling with all of that is an entire exercise in sort of developing patience. I find that when we aren't kind of addressing the issues that come up for us from an emotional standpoint of what it feels like to be losing your vision, and in my case, your vision and your hearing, then it starts to eat away at us. And we start to not really feel great about ourselves. We start to treat other people with sort of resentment, and we start to feel, unkind, or we just start to find ourselves warping into something that doesn't feel kind of authentically like who we are. And there's only so long that we can continue going on that way. So, in terms of navigating vision loss, one of the things that's so important is being able to talk about it. And that, I think, with COVID, I think mental health was finally put on the map for so many people across so many different communities. But certainly for our community, I think it was very helpful. I find that people tend to go to Facebook, or they tend to go to all of these online platforms, which can be very helpful, but also can be a bit gloom and doom. You see a lot of people who go on there, and they're not sort of monitored. And so there's a lot of things that are being thrown out there, and people who are experiencing their own very real mental health challenges, and then people jumping in and trying to help them. And it can also contribute to your own emotion dysregulation. Even reading other people's posts and sort of seeing the communication between others. And so on the one hand, it can be very resourceful, and on the other hand, it can be very difficult because it can make you sometimes feel worse. Okay, well, so what are my options? And this is, again, part of how we develop this partnership with Alma and being able to create greater resources. But I really encourage people to, when you have that urge to, there's a few techniques that I really like to use, and one of them is the stop technique. And the stop technique is when you find yourself in that place of, whether it's you receive a message, or you feel an overwhelming sense of grief, and your instinct is to act just reactively, to just act on it. Somebody says something to you like, do you need your help? No, I've got it. Or any emotion that might come up for you. When your instinct is just to react to it, and we're always getting text messages, and our instinct is that we got to stay on top of it, or it elicits something in us, I want you to try to slow down and just take a step back. So this is the stop technique. And the S for stop is to just stop. Whatever you're doing. The T is to, well, it stands for two things: take a deep breath, or take a step back. And if you're taking a deep breath, it's a big inhale through your nose and an exhale. And if you're taking a step back, it means you're maybe doing 20 jumping jacks, you're screaming into a pillow, you're, throwing ice cold water on your face, you're changing your environment. If you really get sort of that activated by something, that you are taking a beat before you go down that same rabbit hole that maybe you find yourself in this habitual pattern. The O is for observe. Observe what's coming up for you physically. I feel a tightness in my chest. I feel a clenching of my jaw. I feel my fingers clenching. I feel heat rising from my neck into my cheeks. And O, observe what's coming up for you emotionally. I feel really frustrated. I feel really angry. I feel nervous. I feel, scared. I feel pressured, whatever it is. And then the P is to proceed mindfully. And that is proceeding in such a way that will not continue bringing you down the same sort of pattern or rabbit hole that you might have kind of taken historically or before. So I'm just pulling up my notes here. One of the other ways that I like to sort of address some of the things that come up for me is doing some of the mindfulness exercises that come with living with vision loss. And that is, for instance, I remember one day I was walking in the airport, and I was using my cane, and all of a sudden it just like hit me that I remember being in the doctor's office when I was 12 years old, and they told me that I would be blind by the time I was an adult. And at that age, I couldn't possibly wrap my head around what that meant. I mean, a 12-year-old developmentally cannot conceptually understand, because I had vision at that time, what that would look like, what that would mean. And so at the time, what we knew is that I had difficulty seeing in the dark, and that my worst vision was below me. I would trip over the dogs and whatever. But I'd received that diagnosis, and here I was at 40 something years old in an airport, navigating on my own all of these years later, and that diagnosis was real and true, and I was living it. And I was so overcome by the emotion that came with it that immediately I felt like I just wanted to start crying. But instead of crying in that moment, and I could have, I mean, okay, but it was not the time for me to cry. I needed to get to my gate and I needed to get to where I was going. And so what I said to myself is, I see you, grief, and I feel you, and I'm going to hold you in my heart until a later time where I can give you the time that you deserve. And I was still feeling a little weepy, but even being able to acknowledge that emotion of what I was experiencing in that moment and acknowledging it, recognizing it, and giving it the space that it deserved was very cathartic. It was very helpful. And it meant that later, if I needed to allow myself to feel that I would take the time to do it. And oftentimes I have. There's a type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. And DBT originally was developed for people with a diagnosis called borderline personality disorder. And that was, this terrible diagnosis that nobody wanted to get, and there was so much stigma around it. And the reality is, and now, things have really sort of evolved and changed. DBT is a type of therapy that I think everybody, no matter what your circumstances are, could benefit from. There are very effective strategies and tangible ways in which you can address whatever your, emotion dysregulation is, whatever your circumstances might be. It has mindfulness, it has interpersonal effectiveness, which is another way of saying boundaries. Interpersonal effectiveness, boundaries, is a way of being able to figure out what it is that you need, communicate that so that you're not setting a boundary so that you're punishing someone or you're holding people, out or keeping them away from you. It's a way of being able to protect yourself and the relationship. The other thing that it has is mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness. It has radical acceptance, which I'll tell you about. Radical acceptance is something that I always had a hard time wrapping my head around. And what radical acceptance means is accepting the situation for what it is without making it worse. So, for example, I have been at crosswalks historically, and someone has asked me whether I needed their arm to cross the street. And my instinct is to say, and maybe, oftentimes I don't. If it's nighttime, maybe I do, maybe I would. It depends on the neighborhood. It depends on the lighting. This is the spectrum of vision loss. We all know it well. But in that moment, I did not want someone to even ask me whether I needed help. I was just using my cane. I felt like, and somehow it made me feel like they pitied me, or I don't know what I was thinking. But in that moment, instead of going down that rabbit hole of here I am with a disability and, all going through that sort of emotional experience of it, I radically accepted I'm at a crosswalk. I'm using a cane. This person is offering me their arm, and I can either take it or not. And I decided to take it. And the reason why I did was because not even necessarily it was a crosswalk I was familiar with, but because I wanted to practice allowing myself to accept help and allowing myself to recognize that somebody was not pitying me. They were actually offering to make sure that I got across the street safely. So it's accepting your situation without making it worse. Now, making it worse could have looked like any number of different things. All right, this is the situation. I am now someone who is low vision. I use a cane, which means that people out in the world are going to treat me or maybe look at me or offer to help me. And that may be something I'm not comfortable with yet, but that's my reality. And rejecting it or trying to pretend that it's not happening or it doesn't exist isn't helping me. Another thing is being able to, for instance, if you find yourself not wanting to use your cane, it's interesting. I have seen in my practice over the years that the time within someone actually is encouraged to use a cane and told, hey, you would benefit from doing orientation and mobility training, and actually start using a cane, it seems as somewhere between about 5, but closer to 10 to 15 years. That's a huge gap. And I think that a lot of the reasons why that is not because of physical reasons. It's not because they're the lack of orientation and mobility training or trainers. It's because of the emotional implications of what it means to have to go from being a perceived as a normally sighted person out in the world to becoming someone who is walking around with a disability. And in my own circumstances, first it was like, having to adjust to, okay, well, I'm starting to use a cane. And the first, 5, 6, 7, 8 times I used it in public, I cried. And being in New York City and crying using a blind person's cane, fortunately, doesn't draw that much attention. But I remember that once I went through that kind of grieving process, or that process of like, okay, this is now what helps me navigate. I remember leaving my office one night and closing the door and getting to a crosswalk, holding my cane. And when the light changed and I crossed the street, I realized that I was walking a lot faster and I felt a lot more confident than I had when I wasn't using a cane. So I'd practiced all of these strategies, and I'd gone to therapy, and I was doing all of this work on myself to really try to, okay, come to terms with the adjustments that I needed to make to keep myself safe and independent and autonomous. But then I would go out in public, and I remember being at a grocery store, and it was one of those checkouts where it was a self-checkout. This was not long after COVID. And I remember standing there and having to say to the couple behind me, would you mind letting me know when the next checkout stand becomes available? I was using my cane. And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I remember in that moment, well, I don't get it. I feel okay with this. I mean, I've kind of come to terms that this is my reality. So why do I still feel so uncomfortable? And I realized that it wasn't my own discomfort. It was the discomfort of other people. So now I'm out in the world and I feel like, well, I've kind of gotten this down, or I've really done my work and tried to figure this out, and I'm still navigating it, and it's been a process and will continue to be. But now I'm taking on all of the beliefs or all of the different ways in which people out in the world are looking at me or treating me or making me feel. And that was really hard. But having said that, that all is true. You're going to face people and all of these different experiences, and you're going to have to develop the skills for how to deal with that. But the other thing that has happened is that the more I have used my cane and the more consistently I've been out in the world and navigating, the more kindness I have realized there is out in the world than I've ever experienced before. And that is a kindness that I never would have been able to tap into. And it's not a kindness of pitying me. It's a kindness of feeling like there really is good out in the world, that there are people who genuinely want to be a part of an interconnected community that want to help. And that has been incredibly meaningful. And another piece of what I've recognized is that in this process of being able to use my cane or being able to accept help or even being able to ask for it, is that when you ask someone to help you, you're not asking them to do it for you, but when you ask someone to help you, you're letting them know that they matter, that they're needed. And there's nothing we want to know more in this world than that we matter, that we're needed. So that, I think, has been really helpful for me in coming to terms with, the vision loss that I've experienced. One of the other pieces I think that's important to address, hold on, I'm inverting my colors over here. Okay. Are some of the mindfulness practices that you can do. And I encourage you to do them not just with yourself, but maybe do them with a loved one, do it with someone else. Okay, let me get you guys back up and then uninvert my colors. Welcome to vision loss. There we go. So one of the things that I do for mindfulness and grounding exercises, because I think that we oftentimes are operating with our brains and our bodies in like two different places. Like our brain is just kind of like running the show and our body is just kind of trying to keep up. So there's a few things that I do. I try to write down each day. I write something that I'm proud of myself for, something that I'm grateful for, and something that I'm looking forward to. And sometimes I have people, I encourage them to, share that with their spouse before they go to bed at night. Sometimes I often encourage people to do it with their children, to be able to really focus on what we do have, on what we can do, because we have a lot of the reminders of kind of what we're losing and what we can't do. The other thing that I do is there's this real push and pull, I think, between family members and couples and trying to navigate vision loss. And oftentimes we're not talking about it. We're talking around it. We're noticing these changes where we don't have direct conversations with each other about like what's actually happening. I find that it would be incredibly meaningful to me actually to know. I mean, it would be really hard and maybe awkward, but it actually would be meaningful for me to know how my siblings feel about what I live with. And sometimes I experience these, interactions where I can see their sort of frustration with the situation, not necessarily with me, but just kind of with this situation. And so I think it's so important for us, even as loved ones, it's not just the mental health of those who live with vision loss. It's all of us who are, going through these changes and adjustments, and being able to address that is so crucial. Parents, I think, when we receive a diagnosis, we want to do everything we can to protect our children. We want to do everything we can to give them, everything they need to succeed and to be able to normalize their experience and, live in the present and also be planning for the future. It's a really hard kind of place to be in. What I find sometimes is that because parents become so focused on their kid, that they're not addressing their own grief, their own loss, their own anxiety, their own fears, and then that gets channeled into their child. And it's not on purpose. Nobody does anything without the best of intentions. But when you do that, you're actually limiting your child. If your child or your teenager, or if they need to be supported into being able to do things that require more sort of tactile skills, one of the things I do with grounding is I use a lot of putties to help me. It's a very tactile thing. I have a lot of pillows in my office that I let people use that have a lot of texture. And for those of you who are low vision or blind, I've just grabbed a pillow from one of the chairs in my office that has sort of a mustard yellow pattern on it. And I'm just kind of feeling it, and that can be very kind of calming. But being able to look into other types of grounding and mindfulness skills that might not be common for people who are fully sighted, but that are sort of more normal for people who are low vision. Tactile skills are really, really helpful, and being able to ground yourself that way can be really helpful. I have just a few moments here, and I want to be able to hand it over to Elizabeth, but I think what's most important is creating the space for you to be able to recognize that this is very real, that it really does exist, and that you need to give yourself the time to be able to process all of the emotions that come with it. I went to a music event with some friends not that long ago, and I listened to this band, and I could not believe, these days I relearned how to hear digitally, and I had to listen to all this old 90s music because that was kind of what I grew up with, and really loved it. And that kind of helped me connect, the sounds and the words and everything. And so I haven't really heard bands recently that I really like, but this was a band that was like, wow, the harmonizing and the music and the instruments were just awesome. And I was so appreciative to have this experience. Like, I can't believe that I'm able to hear what I'm hearing and to really enjoy it. It's a new band. When was the last time I heard a new band that I liked? And when they brought our food to the table, it was so dark that I could not see the salad that was in front of me. And I've gone to plenty dining in the dark, but this was real. Like this was not an event where you're not supposed to be able to see your food. And so I'm forking at my food, and the confluence of feeling this deep sense of reality and grief and loss that comes with having losing, my vision, while coupled with this tremendous gratitude of being able to hear the music as well as I could. That is so much of what this experience is like. It's complicated, it's complex, and it's only in being able to feel the real strong emotions that come with it that I'm able to feel the real sense of joy and grounding and presence that also comes with being human. So I'm going to hand this over to Elizabeth. We had I'll tell you briefly that we did a partnership with Alma. It was over a year ago that I had a conversation with Jason Manzo and Peter Ginsburg about, okay, there's some real mental health needs that we need to address. And the foundation, that's not their mission. Their goal is really to look for research and for treatments. But they were so open and welcoming to the idea of, okay, but how do we provide resources? And so we met and developed the Mental Health Advisory Council. And I'm so grateful for everyone who's on the council with me to be able to get out to the masses more mental health professionals who are trained in being able to address the needs of our community. And that's what happened. And we're very grateful to Alma for helping us. So Elizabeth, I want to hand it over to you to give you an opportunity to tell everyone about what Alma is and who you are and how this came to be.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And thanks to everyone here today to spend some time and think about these issues around mental health that are of such critical importance, and to really think about what opportunities might be available to you and to the people you love to support your mental health. And that's kind of where we as Alma show up, and why we are really honored to be partnered with Foundation Fighting Blindness to better address the needs of the community of individuals living with blindness and low vision. And we know that there are simply not enough therapists trained in order to provide appropriate mental health support. And so that's where we as Alma, a network of 24,000 independently licensed clinicians, get to partner and see if we can support your community in addressing some of these needs. I'm going to talk not only about Alma, but I'm going to talk a little bit about therapy more broadly. So a little bit of information about me. I'm a psychologist. I have a small private practice, but the vast majority of my time is spent working for Alma, leading our clinical programs and really thinking about what we as an organization can do to make mental health care available to as many people in an affordable, accessible, and highly personalized way as we can. Now, this is important because mental health concerns are incredibly common. I think it's very easy for us to think that, these are things that are rare occurrences in people's lives, but in reality, we know 1 in 10 adults will struggle with depression every year. 1 in 5 with anxiety, 1 in 6 with substance use disorder. And unfortunately, of all of those people, our peers and our family members and those we work with who are struggling, only about half of them will receive mental health treatment. And there are a number of reasons for that. It can be very hard to provide a mental health provider who takes your insurance. It can be hard to find a provider who has a specialty that meets your needs. It can be hard to find a provider who you just feel that kind of sense of connection with. You feel like this is someone who you can trust and who you can kind of let into your world. And so given that we know that there are a lot of obstacles, we want to begin to think about how we can bring mental health professionals and individuals who are seeking care together and make that process easy and result in a very strong therapeutic relationship. So we can go to the next slide. And one way that I think in my work, I really encourage people to recognize is that it's not just that mental health struggles are common, because they are. but actually that they are normal. That to the extent that you are a human being living a life that is rich and full and involves other people and probably involves any number of other transitions, challenges, and losses. And I think that is really, kind of what Rebecca started us with. That painful emotions are going to be a part of what you will experience. And again, there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, that is the most normal, healthy human response. And that as mental health professionals like Rebecca and myself, we know a thing or two about how to help people adapt and thrive as they navigate the ups and downs of being a human being trying to live a full life. Go to the next slide. So I want to start by kind of posing this question to each of you, like, how would you know if you needed professional support? I think Rebecca did a really beautiful job of articulating some strategies around mindfulness and these techniques, the stop technique, other ways of kind of grounding yourself and allowing yourself to experience your emotion fully while moving through it and potentially giving yourself access to other emotions. So there is much that you can do on your own. And I think I see a number of questions in the chat about what kind of modalities work both with children and adults and elderly populations. Rebecca recommended dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. I recommend a similar, actually very similar approach called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. Those two approaches are very similar in that they work with what you think and how you feel, but also do that through a lens of mindfulness. So for those of you who are thinking like, what kinds of tools might you want to look into, those are two good ways to start that you might want to look at on your own. But how do you know if actually you might benefit from someone like me or Rebecca in your life, kind of partnering with you and walking beside you as you develop some of these skills? So you can go to the next slide. So here are some of the things you might notice. If you're struggling with your thoughts or emotions, and the way I think about this is that we notice this. Can you go back? Sorry, we jumped ahead a bit. There we go. What you may notice in this case is that I call it your thoughts or emotions get kind of sticky. They get stuck, right? You have a certain thought or a worry or something that you've been thinking about and analyzing, and you almost feel like you're in a loop, right? Like it just keeps going round and around and you can't let it go. And the same may be true for your emotions, whether it's anxiety, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, any of those kind of emotions that most of us feel experience as painful. When they begin to get stuck, that may be an indication that it's time to find someone to help work with you through those experiences. Also, I mentioned a minute ago that life is really a constant stream of transitions and changes, and we are constantly being asked to adapt. That's certainly true just as we, grow up and get older, but as we start relationships and end relationships, start jobs and end jobs, and as our health or our vision changes, each of those requires us to be able to adapt. And in order to adapt successfully, we have to have the resources to help us do so. And so when people are really finding that it's hard for them to adjust to a change or a transition, they're often very quick to blame themselves and to say, well, what is wrong with me? Why can't I do this? And as a therapist, my approach is really to think more about what do you not have available to you right now? What is it that would be available in your context, in your relationships, or certainly in a professional relationship that might give you more of what you need to be able to weather this transition in the way you'd want to? So if you're noticing some opportunities to potentially navigate transitions more effectively, a professional therapist can be very helpful in those cases. Certainly, it's often important to get help when your functioning is being impacted. And what I really mean when I say that is that if what you are experiencing internally is getting in the way of your ability to live your life, to connect with a partner or a family member, to care for your child, to be present at work, or just to be able to enjoy life, to experience pleasure, to feel like you are engaged and kind of free to choose to move in the direction that you want to go. If your internal experiences are getting in the way of that, that is also a good indication that therapy may be helpful. We often see people who, when they're struggling with these painful emotions or thoughts, use kind of harmful coping mechanisms. So I think a lot about things that we do to kind of numb ourselves from our pain. And so that might look like the things that most of us might think of, like substance use, alcohol, drugs. But it can also look like things like excessive social media use, or avoiding, or kind of opting out of doing things that you want to do because that allows you to avoid or to distance yourself from these painful emotions. So that would be another indication that therapy might be helpful. And then finally, just, we all have patterns of behavior, many of which we have developed over the course of our entire lives, some of which work really well, and some of which work less well. And I find in my own life that the things that we've done a lot of practicing, like over the course of our life, the kinds of behaviors and reactions we have, are often hard to change, usually because we started doing them for a very good reason. And even though that reason may have gone away, we've done a lot of practicing, and so the behaviors tend to stick around. And so those are opportunities where people like me, in my role as a therapist, get to step in and kind of work with you to try on new behaviors, new ways of engaging, and see if we can identify new patterns for you to practice that will move you more in the direction that you want to go. Go to the next. So there are a number of different kinds of treatment. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but just to give you a sense of what the options are. When most people think about therapy, they think about individual therapy. So one-on-one with a trained clinician who most of what you're going to do is talk. Although you might do some mindfulness exercises, you might have some more experiential exercises. It's really something that we engage in a very verbal way. And for most people, that's where their mind goes when they think about therapy. But particularly for families that are struggling with major changes, transitions, a new diagnosis or a progressing diagnosis, sometimes you really want to have all of those people in the room together. And so in those cases, you would look for family therapy. And the same is true for couples, right? In a couple relationship, changes happening for one person inevitably impacts the other. And that can be problematic in terms of how you communicate, how you engage, how you support one another. And sometimes professional support to kind of strengthen your ability to support each other during times of change and transition can be really impactful. And then finally, medication. Medication can be incredibly helpful for people who really need kind of a biochemical shift. And so that is another option. And I usually recommend that people start with a therapist, and most therapists will recognize when it is that it'd be a good idea to bring in a prescriber to help you with medication. I noticed it in the chat. I'm trying to track at the same time. There was a question about virtual therapy and therapy by Zoom. In the Alma network, almost all of our clinicians practice telehealth, so therapy by Zoom. We actually have a relatively small number who do in-person sessions. I think about 30% offer in-person sessions, but nearly 100% offer virtual treatment. So for people who have trouble getting into an office, or just want to see a specialist who might be at the other side of the state, telehealth can really open up a world of opportunities to seek these kinds of treatment, whether it's individual, family, or medication. I often have people ask me questions about what kind of mental health professional do I want to see? Like, who should I see? And at the end of the day, to me, there's one important question. Are you looking for therapy or are you looking for medication? If you're looking for therapy, there are incredibly talented clinicians who have master's level degrees, including licensed social workers, licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists. And there are doctoral level therapists who are also amazing. I don't actually think that you necessarily, that there's any difference in terms of quality based on the degree that an individual has. It really comes down to their approach to therapy and whether that's a good fit for you. And also their personality and who they are and how they engage. And so, you know, I tell people not to worry about the letters after that individual's name as long as they have an independent license. And that's true for both therapists and prescribers. So what I believe is that it's really all about the fit. You know, that ultimately what we want to see is that each client who shows up at Alma's doorstep finds a clinician who's going to be a person who they trust and who they connect with. We can go forward here. And how do you know that you found the right person? Because it's hard if you've never been in therapy before. It's really hard to tell, like, is this the right person for me? And I tell people it's a little bit like dating. You usually have to have 1 or 2 dates before you know for sure. But there are some qualities that therapists bring that when you feel them, when you've experienced them, you kind of know it. And that is that you want someone who feels fully present to you when you spend time together, who accepts you, even when they're challenging you. I can tell you my clients don't always love what I have to say to them, but I think they always, or I hope that they always know that they are accepted and supported, even as we navigate challenges together. And they'll understand you and what you want, and more importantly, be very open to receiving feedback from you about what's working and what's not, what is helping you, helping them connect with you, or pushing you away. All right, can we go to the next one, please? Alma does not stand for anything. Alma is, the translation is soul, S-O-U-L. But we are a network of providers. And so, as I mentioned, there's a shortage of mental health providers who have specialized training, not just willingness, because I think there are a lot of therapists who are very willing to provide support. But at Alma, I think we, you know, one of the reasons we partnered with Foundation Fighting Blindness is we think that willingness is not enough. Therapists need to be trained. They need to be learning from people who have lived experiences so that they can be offering high quality, personalized care to the individuals they treat. And so if we go to the next slide, this is where this partnership comes in. And we are so excited to be bringing our therapists to you. And we can go to the next slide. And what we do as an organization is we help people connect with therapists. Go to the next one. So we help them find the right therapist, not just any therapist, just not someone who takes their insurance, but someone who really is the right fit for them as a person in terms of the expertise that they need. And to do that quickly, usually we can match individuals with clinicians in about 3 days to give them really high quality care. And probably most importantly, to make sure that those people can use their insurance, because otherwise therapy can be very expensive. And so through Alma, you can find the right clinician, get great quality care, and have it paid for by your insurance plan. So we can move to the next one. So a little bit about our providers. There are many of us. We're across all 50 states. We're a very diverse community, with many of us identifying as LGBTQIA+, or racial and ethnic minority groups, treating the full range of individuals from pediatric all the way through geriatric, speaking 36 different languages. And I think generally people are very happy with the quality of the care they receive on our platform. So And so what we want to do is really remove the barriers that might otherwise get in the way of you receiving care. And so that's part of what we've done with Foundation Fighting Blindness. We go to the next slide. What we've done is we've created a directory. This is a directory of ALMA clinicians who have been trained by Rebecca and Charlie directly, have participated in their training, and demonstrated that they have learned enough material to be more effective in providing really personalized, specialized services, and can be found on the Foundation Fighting Blindness website, listed by state. And we're not in all 50 states yet, in terms of we are still working on building out this network. But I think when you have a chance, and I'll show you a QR code in just a moment so you can check out our directory, and you can also look at the homepage for the partnership, that we are going to build hopefully a very robust network of clinicians like me and like the ALMA, other folks on the ALMA network, who will be trained and available to work with members of this community. So if you have your mobile device near you right now, and you want to use this QR code, it will take you directly to our partnership page. We can make this available to you at another point. We can email it with the other information at the end of this presentation. And just a little bit about what to expect in a first session. And I always like to give people information, because many of us have been to therapy before, but many of us haven't. And so it can feel really uncomfortable or uncertain going into a first session. And really, I think about that initial session or consultation as being kind of a mutual interview, not to decide whether, you are going to be necessarily right for therapy, but to decide if what that therapist has to offer and who they are is going to be the best fit for who you are and what you need. And so kind of going into that first session, and we can move to the next slide, with that kind of expectation of, the opportunity to get information, to learn about this person, and to learn kind of what your experience in treatment with this individual would look like. And they will tell you what you could expect to do in a therapy session, or these things, or whether they would assign homework, or what kind of approach they take. So I know I've talked a bunch. Maybe we can go ahead and put the QR code back up for now. And it looks like there are a number of questions in the chat. I might have caught a few on the way, but Rebecca has rejoined, and we can go ahead and make ourselves available to answer any questions you may have.
Yes, and this is Bailey here. I'll go ahead and start going through some of the questions, and we'll get some of these answered. And I will also make sure that in the post recap, when we send out the recording, that we do have the QR code as well as the direct link to these great resources that were talked about today, so that you all have that if you missed any of it. So let's see here. We're going to scroll back up to the top a little bit. So I remember there was one question in here about going back to the idea of children and how children can experience the same emotion. And so how do we as allies and advocates communicate to children's teachers that the kids feel this way too? So really making sure that those other connections that the kids are around know the best way to interact with them.
This is Rebecca speaking. I guess I'll take this one. So there's a few things. One of which is with kids is that in terms of addressing their mental health needs, one of the most important things is just meeting them where they are, and dealing with whatever the circumstances are that they are currently facing. Maybe it's that they struggle to see at night, or that they struggle to see sort of below them. But in terms of communicating with their, educators, one of the most important things that you can do is not just advocate for them, but teach them how to advocate for themselves. Self-advocacy is one of the most, if not the most important skill that you can teach a child, no matter what their circumstances are. Being able to advocate for yourself, for instance, when a child is struggling maybe to see, needs to grab an arm, being able to encourage that, and also to have the teacher, we don't want to coddle them and say, oh, it's okay, I'll do it, I can help you. You want to be able to empower them. And so I think the self-advocacy skills are really, really important. You're going to deal with, professionals along the way in terms of educating your kids who are going to get it and some who really aren't. And that's part of what's going to allow you to really flex your advocacy muscles and your self-advocacy muscles. So yeah, my biggest encouragement is being able to find whatever the right language is, or even talk to your child about what they would feel comfortable, saying to a teacher, what they would feel comfortable saying on the playground at recess, what they would feel comfortable, sharing with another, with a friend, and finding that one friend maybe that they can confide in, and just being able to develop the skills from there. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And then Elizabeth, I'm going to throw this one back over to you because we've had a couple questions around the therapists. So are the therapists able to practice virtually outside of their licensed state, or are they only confined into the states that they are licensed?
So what is true for all independently licensed clinicians is that they can only practice in states in which they are licensed. There are a couple of programs which are interstate compacts that allow these states to agree that clinicians can practice with a license from another state. Those are still relatively few and far between. So in general, you are going to want to find a clinician who is licensed in your state.
Perfect. And just kind of a secondary follow-up to that, because I know on our website we do have some states that do not have representation yet for individuals who have taken this low vision certification course. So can others expect for them to have a therapist that might join that list over the next few months, or how could they expect to see those lists grow?
Yeah, so this was something that Peter and I talked quite a bit about because we wanted to find the right balance, and we knew it would be frustrating to come and look for a therapist and not find one in your state. We also knew that getting people in every one of the 50 states was going to take some time. And so what we've done is we did an initial training that had a large group of individuals. And now on a monthly basis, we are adding additional providers who have completed this training because it's available to all of our members. And we are encouraging them when they join ALMA to consider completing this training so they can be added to the directory on the Foundation Fighting Blindness website. It's going to take some time. We started with 0. And so we are really just so pleased that, Rebecca and Charlie were able to bring their expertise to quite a number of our folks, and we're committed to continuing to build that list of therapist resources.
That's wonderful. And one piece of that I do just want to highlight again, since we had a couple questions from therapists in our chat who are wondering how to get that accreditation. So if they would be interested in getting that, then they would just need to be listed as an ALMA provider, and then that training would be able to be provided. Is that correct?
So if you wanted to get the training through ALMA, you would need to be an ALMA member. And there may be opportunities, and I'm sure Bailey, you could follow up for Foundation Fighting Blindness to make that training available outside of ALMA. But for our platform, it is available free to any of our members.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so Rebecca, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so this is Rebecca speaking, that this is a training that we are going to continue training professionals. Obviously, we are so grateful to ALMA. I couldn't think of a better, platform to be able to partner with. And so, and having said that, not all providers are ALMA, providers. So we are going to continue to offer this training. What would be helpful is, I'm sorry, I have yarn here because just I've taught myself how to knit without using vision. And unfortunately, now it's become like a habit that I do. So that's what's happening over here for those of you who are watching me. So we are going to continue offering this training, whether you're an ALMA provider or not, but we have to have the interest. And once we've built enough interest in professionals who have reached out to FFB, then we will, offer it again. And the other thing is that there were quite a few mental health professionals on the training who were also low vision. And I was so psyched to see, because there is, listen, finding a good mental health provider, as Elizabeth said, it is sort of like a dating process, which can feel weird. But when you find someone you really feel like, understands you, it is so impactful and meaningful. And so to know that there are other people who are low vision and who are blind who are doing this training is, I think it's so impactful when you have someone who really understands it both personally and professionally. Yeah.
I love that. That is fantastic. And before I switch gears just a little bit, one more question around the providers within ALMA. We've had a couple of community members who have mentioned about ASL interpreters, or for our friends who may be deaf blind. So are they able to put in those type of requests when they are navigating ALMA in terms of if they would need an ASL interpreter?
They are. Now, one thing to know about our network is that we are all each run our own individual practice. And so, you can identify folks who have built a practice in which they are able to utilize those kinds of resources. And so our role is to really help connect you with those individuals who make those resources available to their clients. But that is something we can support as we make those connections between clients and therapists.
Perfect, perfect. And yeah, Elizabeth, I think it's back to one of the slides that you shared with everybody is really dating your, therapist to figure out which one is the best fit. So that's good to know that there's a wide variety that people can reach out to. So Rebecca, I want to bounce back to you for 1 second, because there is a question in here relating back to some of your presentation pieces. So how do we set boundaries or navigate difficult questions? So for this particular example is that, when someone is navigating it, owning their own condition and their own vision loss diagnosis, and when they're in communities trying to explain that to others who maybe do not understand exactly how they feel, how can they respectfully share with them, so they can start to not feel so alone, but also setting those boundaries of what is too much information and what is enough information?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we could have an entire webinar series on boundaries. So I think what's important is for you to be proactive, meaning come up with a few things that you feel comfortable or would feel confident saying to someone. I've gone into a therapist's office myself, in the past, and one of the frustrations I found as someone living with Usher syndrome is feeling like I'm spending most of my time educating this person about my condition. We're not even talking about the stuff I need to talk about, which is part of why we developed this partnership. So, but I had a therapist say to me, "So what can you see?" And it made me feel so sort of it just didn't feel good. It felt like, well, so I know that maybe wasn't their intention, but it just wasn't the way that I wanted that question to be asked. I hadn't even known this person longer than like 3 minutes. My example there is, so what I said, and again, remember, I'm a therapist, and being a therapist, I think one of the most ethical things you can do is be in your own therapy to address your own stuff. But so what I said is, oof, I think hearing that question posed to me that way feels a little jarring. So I'm just gonna, take a step back. Like I actually took a step back in that moment. When you're on the street, you can't predict what someone's gonna say. So come up with a few things that you would feel somebody says like, wait, well, you don't look blind. That's a common one, right? Or I've been on the bus and used my cane, and I get on the bus and I put it down and I start reading, my enlarged text, and people, tell me I'm faking it, whatever. We've all experienced that. So what are a few things that you would feel comfortable saying and have them in your mind so that when you're faced with that situation, Charlie, my, partner in making this webinar for educating the mental health providers, he'll say, hey, I appreciate your question. I'm not comfortable talking about this, but I hope you have a good day. He's very sort of demonstrative of like, you don't have to take the bait, you don't have to engage, or like, I've said to someone when I had my hair up and my cochlear implant was showing, she said, what's on your head? And what I wanted to say was like, really, in your mind, you thought that was the way you should ask that question? So I said, it's a cochlear implant. I showed it to her because I was in an okay mood that day. And I said, I adhere it to the side of my head and it helps me hear, like how a person would hear normally. And she said, oh, cool. So I think coming up with the things that you would feel comfortable saying and having those in your mind so that when you're faced with those situations, you don't feel sort of like frantically, overwhelmed.
Perfect, perfect. And Rebecca, this one for you, and I'll do one more to each of you, and then I know we're getting close to time here. So combining a couple different questions into one. So we've had a few individuals reach out about struggling with the day to day. So whether a treatment didn't go exactly how they anticipated, or the times of, the gradual vision loss, that one day you might wake up and your sight is just not where it was yesterday. So dealing with those general anxieties around this gradual grief, what are some of the tools that you would recommend?
On a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is where I think mindfulness practice is so, so, so important. And we hear mindfulness thrown around and we hear meditation thrown around, and it's like, what does that even mean? And I think what mindfulness to me is a very proactive way of dealing with things. First of all, if you experience loss, you do have to give yourself that opportunity to feel what that feels like. And I wish there was a magic answer. I wish there was some way of saying like, oh, it's not, just it'll pass. You really do have to allow yourself to feel that. And I think that's part of why it's so important for us to have that support, mental health professionals, or, community loved ones that you can, be able to share those emotions with in a safe way. Oftentimes people that we love want to help fix the situation. Well, why don't you just do this? And sometimes we don't need anyone to fix it. We just need them to be able to hold that space with us because it can feel very lonely. So in terms of the day-to-day, the mindfulness piece is I like to start every morning and I do it for 5 minutes. So when I say mindfulness, I don't want you guys to think that I have like all my chakras aligned and my third eye is like, shining bright. It's really just 5 minutes of being able to sit there. And I like to sit up tall and make sure that my sit bones are, kind of firmly planted, both feet on the ground. And I allow myself to breathe in. And when I breathe in, I envision breathing, all of this sort of light and weightlessness and calm and, just sort of being present for what's happening right now. I envision it filling my head and my neck and my shoulders and my chest and into my belly. And then I exhale. I wrote a book like 10 years ago, and I came up with a mantra, and I oftentimes encourage people to come up with their own mantra. And if you need to borrow mine, great. That the mantra was breathe in peace, and I would breathe in through my nose, breathe out fear. And when I inhale and I envision, breathing in that weightlessness and the calm and that sense of just neutrality, of not trying to be, feeling great or happy, but just trying to be okay. I also envision myself exhaling what feels heavy, what color it looks like. And for me, it's a dark, smoky gray, and just envisioning that leaving my body, envisioning the heaviness, the things that are keeping me stuck, the things that I feel afraid of. And that practice for me has been so helpful, so that when I find myself later in the day feeling really frustrated, I am reminded that I can go back to sort of my breath of being able to calm myself. Our emotion dysregulation comes back to our body and our breathing. And the sooner you can bring yourself back to that and allow yourself just to be and feel what you're feeling, the sooner you're going to be able to deal with what's in front of you. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think those are great practices that we can all use. So, Elizabeth, I'm going to throw one more question your way before we wrap up, and then we'll close for the day. So, if anyone is navigating to the ALMA website first, instead of going to the FFB website first, is there a way for them to request a individual who has gone through this low vision training directly from your website as well?
The answer to that is not yet. This is another thing that Peter and I spent lots and lots of time talking about, how to give people the best experience possible. And we decided that until we have clinicians in every single state, we would actually keep all the information on trained clinicians on the FFB site, so that you are not searching through a directory and potentially not able to yet find someone in the state in which you live. We anticipate that by probably the second half of this year, we will be able to have enough clinicians trained to add that as a search button on our website. But for now, I would highly recommend anyone in this group go to the FFB website, look at our directory of clinicians. And if you can't find one there, we have a lot of really great clinicians who certainly would be interested in hearing from you, and may have not had a chance to complete this training yet, but certainly are very well trained clinicians, and and you might even be the one to prompt them to recognize the need for this education, and that would be a beautiful beautiful gift to that clinician to have your work inspire their ongoing growth. So
Wonderful.
I would recommend checking out the FFB website as your first stop at this point.
Perfect. No, that sounds fantastic. So for all of you who maybe did not get your answer to your question directly and it didn't fall into one of these buckets we were able to get to today, we will be following up after. One of your community representatives will be reaching out to send you the recording as well as an answer to your question. But if you have any needs in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us and we will help you out in any way we can. Once again, please keep watch for your inbox over the next week or so as we get this recording populated and ready for you all. But other than that, just a big thank you again to Elizabeth and to Rebecca. Your all's content and what you are doing is just very helpful for our community. So we really appreciate being able to go along this journey with you all. Thank you all who have listened in for joining us on this Saturday, and we'll hope you will join us for one of our future quarterly webinars. Have a great weekend, everyone.